Okay, I'm going to show you how to search for a poem. If your artist is a poet, how to find your primary sources for poems. So the first thing that I'm going to do for poems is go to poetryfoundation.org. Any poet that we have listed as an option that you chose is going to be on Poetry Foundation. So let's imagine that my poet is Percy Shelley. You'll remember Percy Shelley from our Frankenstein unit. He was Mary Shelley's lover, and they ran away to France together and then eventually married. But he was also a poet in the English Romantic period. So here's Percy Shelley, great picture of him. I would recommend reading through these biographies on Poetry Foundation, are very extensive and very helpful. See how long that is? And it's quite academic, so you'll get a lot of great information from there. But when you're ready to find your primary sources, the text by the poet, if you look along the right-hand side, you'll see the poems, and you can go to see all poems. Now, when you're choosing your poems, you want to pick out the ones that are most likely to have been written about in terms of scholarly research, and that's going to be the most well-known poems. So don't just click on the first one or find the shortest poems. You kind of want to get an idea of which ones is this poet most known for, because those are the ones that you're most likely to find outside research on. So just from knowing about Percy Shelley, I know that Ozymandias is one of his most well-known poems. And here's the poem. So after reading it, I think this will be a great poem to use. Now, if you have a printer at home and you want to print it out, you could print it out physically so that you could make notes on it and interact with the text by annotating it. You could also print to OneNote and do it that way, but you do definitely want to make sure that you have read and comprehended this poem. If you go to View Poem Guide, this is also a critical article about Ozymandias that you could consider using. If your poem does have one of these, you could consider using this as a secondary source, because this is originally published in a scholarly source in a book that was called The Art of the Sonnet. Anyway, so I'm going to go back. Now I'm ready to cite my poem. This is where you're going to make use of having multiple tabs up here, okay? So first I'm going to go to Nodal Tools. I'm going to click on my research project, which should be your name. And then I'm going to click on sources, and I'm going to create a new source. Now, almost all of the sources that you're finding are probably originally going to be found, you're finding them on a website. So I'm going to click on website, but then this poem was printed in a collection of poetry called Shelley's Poetry and Prose. So this is anthology collection. This is where you're going to go, I think, for any poem that you find, unless you found it in an actual book that you have at home or in an ebook from the library. You're going to want to go to website, anthology collection, and then story, essay, poem, longer work. So the name of the container website, that means where did I find it? I found it on Poetry Foundation. The URL, the date of access. Okay. Now the story, essay, poem, longer work. Okay, so the author of this poem is Percy Shelley. The title of the work is Ozymandias. Your specific work was authored or published. Okay, let's go here and see if I see it. So this is 1977, but I know that Percy Shelley lived in the 1800s, so this can't be when he actually wrote it. So that must be when this book was published. Does it say when he wrote it here? No. Okay, so now I'm just going to go up and Google Ozymandias, published in 1818. Okay, now I want to talk about where it came from on here. So this is where we're looking at sourced, Shelley's Poetry and Prose. So it came from an anthology called Shelley's Poetry and Prose, and this was published in 1977. Now I need to find out who the editor of this is. So now I'm going to open another tab, Shelley's Poetry and Prose, find it on Amazon just to find the publication information. Looks like the authors are Neil Freystadt and Donald Raymond. Let's see if I can remember those names. Sorry, editors. Neil Freystadt and Donald Raymond. Let's see if I got that right. Neil Freystadt. Donald H. Raymond. Donald H. Raymond. And those are both the editors. A multi-volume set. It looks like there's just one, so I don't need to list volume. The publisher is Norton. Remember, we don't need to do publication cities unless it was published before 1900. The edition is the second edition. And we're going to skip series name and series number. Okay, eventually you'll also go and write your annotation here. So this is where you would do a summary of the poem and then also the key quotations. But I'm going to leave that for now, and I'll show you an example of that later. Yes, include this in your finals. We're excited. Save. Fingers crossed that I got everything. Great. The other thing that's kind of cool that you can do is you can add a tag primary source, and then you'll be able to keep track. Do I have 5 primary and 5 secondary? Okay, that's it for finding your poem, citing your poem, and remember, you may have to go to Google or Amazon to find other publication information.